Hey team, this is Grant David Collins, and welcome to Giving is a Skill. Now that sounds pretty dang awesome. For those of you who are watching the YouTube side of the podcast, you'll notice that in the back, we are still on the Basement Philanthropy bandwagon. That is changing very soon, as well as a new introduction and opening song. So those are coming very soon. But today you just have me, and we'll probably just play the Basement Philanthropy theme song one more time just for old time's sake. So let's get started. All right. Well, welcome back to the podcast. And thank you for tuning in last week if you tuned in. And if you didn't, I would love it if you would go back and listen to last week's podcast. It feels like it's been a long time since I recorded that, and it's only been about a week. And I just want you to know that I'm still in the work around everything that I talked about last week. But what I will say is that I have felt a fire within myself around being a person of action around what is happening in conflict zones all over the world, especially in Israel and Gaza. And one of the things that I've done that I thought was really helpful for me was talking about it with other people that I am around. So I've had a couple different opportunities this week, whether it's been inviting people over to my house for a game night or doing a service project this last weekend, that I was able to take 5 minutes out of both of those opportunities and just talk to my friends about what I was seeing and what I was going through on my side as far as working through it, and kind of inviting them to get involved. And so that was really a helpful step that I took, and definitely still in discovery around how we can continue to be of service and support to just a really tragic situation that is happening over there. So we'll probably just continue to kind of talk about it, because I think that that's an important thing, to just keep those things on our minds and not switch them off, which is so easy to do in our day and age. So this likely won't be the last time that we talk about it, but I wanted to just give a quick update. A few months ago, a reporter from the Provo Daily Harold reached out to me for an interview. Now, this reporter's name is Darrel Hammon, and Darrel has a really interesting backstory. Before he was a part-time reporter reporting on giving and charity in the Utah area, he was actually the president of a university based out of Cheyenne, Wyoming, and he had a long career in that collegiate atmosphere. And after he was done with that, he served a mission for his church for a few years and then came back in kind of a retirement giving connection or concoction. He is now going around telling the stories of people who are attempting to give back. And so when he reached out to me, I was just really honored and excited to see what that experience would look like. So a few weeks later, he jumped into my basement, or walked into my basement. He didn't jump into my basement. And we had the opportunity to sit down. And one of the things that I noticed immediately about Darrel was that he was just a master at creating space for people. I felt so heard and so free to tell my own story. And the insights and the perspectives that came out of that interview, some of them were things that I had thought of before, but there was a lot about that interview that was just really eye-opening for myself. So I just really appreciated both Darrel's professional way of operating and also just the space that he created for me to tell the story. Now, there are potentially a lot of you who are here because of that article, and I just wanted to quickly extend a warm welcome to the Giving is a Skill podcast. And for those of you who have been here for a while, I'm really excited to share this version of the story with you. It's different than any other recording that I've done before. And you'll notice that the episode today is pretty long, and it is because we just get to talk about a lot of really impactful things. And I just didn't do very much editing on this podcast because I felt like the material within the interview was just worth a listen. So without further ado, I'm going to let Darrel take over the interview, take over the hot seat. I can't wait for you to take a listen.
Well, first of all, thanks for allowing this to occur. Anytime we can find people who make a difference, uppercase or lowercase, I call it, then that's good. So, but I want to know a little bit about you.
Yeah. I think probably the best way to describe me is, especially from like a giving standpoint, is that I grew up in a home that was very centered on giving and service, through a church that we were very committed to as a family. And on top of that, I would say that in some ways I feel like the desire to give is almost a gift of itself. I usually call it it feels like it was like a seed. And it's fun to feel that way because it doesn't feel like it's mine, if that makes sense. Like in this space, it's often easy to kind of take ownership of like, oh, I did this difference or I did this change. And it's not that I think that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but it's fun to feel like in some ways this was just planted in me by the universe or whatever caused that to happen. And I've just decided to develop it and put water to it and make sure that the soil's where it needs to be. And so over time, that has grown to something that is much bigger than it started. I would say that my family was very service and community oriented, but they were not involved in any type of like foundational philanthropy or giving. So that's where it seems like kind of a strange like gift or a seed, because I was from a young age, from 12 on, I just had this desire to have money and to do to do something else than like buy a Corvette with that money. Like it was just kind of, it's just weird. It's strange that I just felt this very strong desire to do something in the world with that money. I don't really know where that comes from, and so that's why I kind of just chalk it out to just.
Gotcha. Did you buy your Corvette yet?
No, not close to that yet.
Well, that's awesome that your family instilled that in you, and you just have kept that going.
Yeah.
And a seed is always, I'm from the farm, so the seed is always a great way of saying, that's how things grow. You can plant that baby, but you got to water it.
Yes.
We put manure on ours.
Yeah, exactly.
that real tough stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. So how did you come about then for Basement Philanthropy?
Yeah. So as I moved kind of on in my life, I served a mission, a 2-year mission for my church in Oklahoma.
Good.
And it was interesting that I think that was a place where I started to see or have this equation that I had made up in my mind start to crack a little bit. It didn't happen on the mission, but it happened after. But I'll tell you about what the equation was, okay, and then we'll kind of reference it probably a couple times here. I believed that giving was pretty much this arithmetic of like, it's very simple arithmetic, and the arithmetic went essentially that I needed to go to school or have some sort of opportunity, work really hard, earn money or build a company or whatever it might be. And once I was either rich or retired, then I could give back. So that was kind of the equation that I had set up in my mind. And on my mission, I had a couple experiences that started to crack that from the standpoint of, I remember one experience in particular. We were at a gas station with a member of the church. We'd stop for like drinks on a really hot day, and we were walking back into the car. And we get back into the car, and the driver doesn't get back in the car, and we're like, "Where'd he go? Like, what happened?" And we turned around, and this man is talking to this woman who was in need. You could tell just by the way her car was, and just certain circumstances that made it a little bit more obvious. And I saw him put his credit card into the gas station machine. and pay for a gallon or, whatever, tank of gas for this woman. He got back in the car and didn't really say anything about it. Just like, it was just kind of his way of operating. And this man was fairly well off as an individual, but in that scenario, it was like, it didn't really matter. Like $40 is $40. Like if you have 100 million or if you have 1,000 in the bank, $40 is not really that much in that sense. And so it was experiences like that started to say like, maybe there's something different here that can happen before these like cultural norms of goals of giving can happen. And so as I came back and I started to go to college, I went to college in Idaho at BYU, Idaho, and Rexburg, just was thinking about these things, but I wasn't doing really anything about them until I had this experience with some roommates that I had, and I was living with 5 of my like really close friends. And 2 of them were living a very different life than I was. I had a very supportive family, both financially, emotionally, just like they were just there for me. And these 2 roommates had different scenarios or different situations, but they did not have the support, both from the financial and the emotional side. In a lot of ways, they were providing that for their family. And it was just kind of a wake-up call for me. Like, how is this even possible? Like, kind of getting outside of my bubble a little bit and saying like, wow, like, how does this work? How do you even do this? Like, I can't even really comprehend that experience. And so naturally I kind of felt this desire to help, like, okay, yeah, let me do some things. Like I was being supported by my family. I had a scholarship. I had I was in a financial situation. By no means was I a millionaire, but I had money as a college student that I could help out in some way. And that giving experience fell apart fairly quickly. And I almost lost both of those friendships. And I didn't even end up giving money, which was the kind of the crazy thing. Like it just was in the conversations and the discussions that we had. And it was in that moment that the cracking like really happened. And essentially what I realized is that if I wait until I'm rich or retired to be involved with this, like I'm going to either have to outsource all of it, or I'm going to basically, I usually use the language like be a child with dynamite, just throwing it everywhere, hoping that it does good. And in a lot of sense, it doesn't. There's so many examples of people with money or resources that just devastate economies or people or families. And they think that they're all good and that there's no accountability needed because they're doing good in their world, but they're actually creating a disaster. And it was in that moment that I realized that equation was wrong, that it was off. And so it was pretty big kind of gut punch, because that was what I had planned to do with my life, basically. And all of a sudden it was kind of all thrown up in the air around, well, what happens here? So I just was around that concept, was thinking about it. And I started to, it was kind of around the same time, and these are kind of related. My dad taught me a lot about this concept of exponential gain, and that was through the stock market. And he just taught me this principle of like, hey, you want to get involved when you're young, because you can, have a little bit more opportunity to have risk. You can learn this skill. And if you put a little bit aside every month when you're a kid or in your early 20s, that can turn into some like major money when you're older, through the concept of exponential gain. And I started to connect those two. I was like, well, if this works in the stock market, can this work with any type of skill? And I had that start to happen as I started to get into the stock market and be a little bit more comfortable. By no means am I like a broker or anything crazy like that, but I was able to start to navigate my way around what is a Roth IRA, what is a broker, what are these accounts, like all of the things that seem so scary all of a sudden are like, well, wait a second, these aren't really that scary. You just have to learn them, and then you can use them as tools. And I don't know if it was the exact combination of those things, but I started to think, well, is giving the same thing as that? Like, is there this concept that I can start to learn a skill set of giving, and that maybe there's an opportunity for that to have that exact same effect. Like over the course of my entire life, if I started to put a little bit of money, quote unquote, not even real money, but just like time and effort into developing this skill, is there a world where that has that same exponential effect? And so that's kind of the journey that I started to go on in my early 20s. This is probably 22, 23 years old.
And that was what years are that?
That was, so I got home from my mission in 2015. So this is probably 2016, 2017.
2016, that's good. Not long ago then.
Yeah, no, not very long ago.
Excellent. So when did you come up with the idea of the title of Basement Philanthropy?
Yeah, so that comes a little bit later. There's probably something else that comes before then that might be interesting for you.
Okay.
So when I had that realization, I decided I'll just start to do something in this area. So I just started doing little tiny things, giving. I would buy flowers for somebody, or a gift card for a friend that was having a tough week, or write a note thanking somebody, just really simple giving experiences. And I started to notice that, just like any other skill, as I started to put some time and effort into it, I started to realize things that were different. And I started to see that why the initial giving experience that I talked about that kind of cracked this equation, why it had gone so poorly. Started realizing those that are in need, it's not a fun place to be if you're in need. And also, if you feel like you're going to come in and solve everything, and that you know everything, and that you're so much better than these people, or whatever that might be, of course that's going to be off-putting. Of course that's going to but these are things I just never thought about or had any experience around. And so as I'm starting to do these little small giving things with that focus, I'm starting to learn oh, wait a second. Okay, this makes sense why this started to go wrong. And if I do things differently, I can start to have different experiences. And it was around that same time that I started to put systems into my life that allowed me to give more. So I break down giving into three main buckets that someone can get involved with. There's probably more. This is just the easiest way that I've been around it. There's the time bucket, there's the talents bucket, and then there's the money bucket. And I noticed that in each one of these buckets that someone could put a system into their life that could have them be involved with giving in a proactive and more effective and efficient way. So I'll just give an example. I started to do the same thing with my giving money that I was starting to do with money that I was putting into the stock market or savings or whatever that might be. And that is every time I got a paycheck from my college job, or I actually started working for a company full-time when I was a junior in college. And I just started putting a percentage of that money aside into another account that I had. And I just designated that for giving. And it started off really small. It was just $50 or, $100. There wasn't that much money in that account, but I had already distanced myself from it. So when a giving opportunity arose, a friend was having a struggle, or, I saw somebody that was in need in one way or shape or form, I just already had it. I'd already distanced myself from that money. It wasn't what often happens to people, right, where it's oh no, Julie needs something. Do I have enough money? Do I want to get that? Do I want a t-shirt instead? There's all these games that we go through. And I didn't have to do that anymore, because I had already said, this is what this money's for. And so it was really easy to start to get more involved. And what I noticed is that those experiences started coming more and more, because I just started to see. And I think that's a big thing that I've noticed about, if you define what is the skill of giving, one of the things I think is crucial to that skill is just being able to get outside of yourself. And it's hard to do that. I think that is harder than we think it is, or that we believe it to be. And the reason why is because everything that we do in our lives almost focuses us inward. So the advertisements from people, companies that spend billions of dollars, it's all about what you don't have, or you don't have enough, for all those types of things. And so in some ways, we're kind of pitted against ourselves in giving. So many people want to give, but they just can't get outside of who they are as individuals. And it's not necessarily their fault, but it does take a bit of intention to start to make that happen. And I noticed that as I started to get involved with putting a little bit of money aside and then willingly starting to give that, I started to make that happen. And I started to do the same thing with my time and my talents. So you can, do a similar method in that way. You can look at your week and say, oh, maybe I take 3 hours or 2 hours that I would have spent on social media or watching a movie or whatever that looks like. And I wonder if there's an opportunity in my community that I could use that time to be involved with on more of a consistent basis. And, talents are a very similar way. What skills do I have? And every nonprofit or community service group needs skills. You don't just create a good organization by just saying you want to do it. You need accountants, you need marketers, you need those types of things. And so in a similar way, it's if I have a little bit, maybe I'll put 2 hours aside and I'll use my specific talents and I'll find an organization that could utilize that. And it's kind of the same process. You can basically do that for each one of those resource buckets.
That's an incredible thing, because I think of some of the foundation I work with that they don't have money, but they'll go down and they'll paint the school.
Yeah.
Or they're artists, so they have a playground, and so the playground, the walls, because they're high walls.
Yeah.
In some places, they paint these beautiful murals.
Yeah.
And I can't do that.
Right.
That's not my talent.
Yeah.
Right? But I can do other things.
Yeah.
But I think that's very, you call it intentional, but it's purposeful too.
Yeah.
Because people say, what talents do I have? Well, let me tell you what talents you have. Let's utilize that talent.
Totally.
I think that's awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah. And the other thing is that I think that we often have a pretty terrible relationship with both time and money and talents, to be honest.
Yes.
And the beautiful thing about giving is that it's almost a way to start to heal that a little bit. I'll just give a monetary example because it's just easier to speak into, but each one of them has their own thing. But, we often think that we don't have a lot. And that's because we have this bias that we have around, it's called comparative bias. Right. Essentially, we say where am I stacking up within my friends or within my community? If you say that here in Lehi, Utah, you're going to feel you're way out of, there's so much that you should be doing. Right. But if you compare yourself to, 60% of the world, whatever your income is, you could even be minimum wage here in the United States. And you take a small portion of that money and you make that useful in some sort of organization that is utilizing things in a third world country, you can make a huge difference.
Right.
But people don't feel that way, but it's this beautiful process of being able to heal that, because if you can start to experience what you have as being enough, then all of a sudden, your relationship with a lot of different things starts to change.
But how do you help people understand that what I have is enough, even though it's un chin, as the Dominicans would say, or it's grandiose, something you have $20,000, you can go buy a house for, but I have enough skill to go paint something that's going to be a lot lasting, because people see that. They don't see the money, but they see the skill. So how do you engender that? What is one of the things you've done to help people understand that I am enough and I have enough?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I'll answer it kind of in our kind of timeline conversation as we kind of are working through this. So as I started to notice that my skill was getting better, that as I was putting these systems into my life and I was experiencing similar healing in my area. And, I think healing and growth is probably needed in this concept, because I don't think that by any means was I totally broken in all of these areas, right. But I just think I had a relationship that wasn't very useful. It wasn't very powerful in those areas. So as I began to have that experience, I kind of came back to this exponential growth factor. And I thought to myself, Bill Gates is one of the most wealthy people in the entire world. Right. And he gives a ton of money.
$30 billion.
Yeah. It's a lot of money. It pales in comparison to the amount of money that individuals give. In 2021, over 70% of the $425 billion that was given to charity was done by individuals, just people, random people. And, 30 billion, that's a lot. But if you compare it to 370, it's not as much. Right. So I started to realize, like, wait a second, even if I become Bill Gates, I'm still going to have a limit on my giving. And by no means is that disparaging, what these big people are doing. But it was just like, maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe it's not to focus just on what I create. And then I started to realize, like, okay, how does exponential growth actually work? Well, exponential growth, if you're looking from an investment standpoint, works because you have, multiple like dollars that then compound on each other that over time creates more than what you had initially. And so I started to think about that from the standpoint of like, well, what if there's all these people that are on the sidelines of giving. They don't give, or they only give when someone like asks them, or whatever it might be. What if there was a way to even maybe expand the pie, to get some of those people that were on the sidelines into the game, and then to start to have them give? What type of impact could actually result from that? What's the ripple effect that could happen there? And that's when it was probably 2 years ago, I started to be involved with this concept that would later turn into basement philanthropy, that has evolved again, and we'll talk about the evolution that we're even making right now, into something that we call GrassRoots Giving. And that's really what started to evolve into, what if I put my time and talents that I have, which I'm fairly comfortable in front of a camera, I'm fairly comfortable in front of a microphone. In fact, I kind of like hearing my own voice,
especially in a microphone.
Yeah, exactly,
like that.
exactly. So I've often been told that I have a radio voice, and so you just have to put it. Right. You got to put it to use in that. No, you got to have a talent there. But I'm comfortable in that space, and I enjoy being with people around this concept. I just love sitting down with individuals and saying, like, hey, like, you want to, I've never met somebody that doesn't want to give, but I have met a lot of people that don't.
Right.
And the reason why is they just don't know how. It's not even because they don't want to, they just don't know how. And so it kind of gets on the back burner for them. And so the thought process was, is there a way that I can lower that barrier to entry so that individuals can start to see, wait a second, okay, I can get involved. I can make an impact. I can make a difference. And so that's essentially what started the thought process in my mind around, okay, if I could start, by no means am I even an expert.
Right.
But I have more knowledge than the average person just because I've been doing it for almost 6 years now. And so I know a little bit more. I have connections now in the space. What if I started to share that? What would happen? That was basically the hypothesis. And what's been beautiful is that that compounding has started to happen, which it was kind of gets back to your question that you asked initially around, what is it that, like, how do you start to help somebody, an individual that doesn't see themselves as mattering, that doesn't see themselves as having enough to get involved? That really was the question that we started to chase after. How do we actually do this? And so the podcast, oftentimes people think of podcasts as like this expression or this way of like getting out in the world. That's not actually why I started the podcast. The podcast was simply a tool for me to have consistent accountability within learning and growing in this space. If you have a weekly podcast that comes out, you got to do the work around building content around that. And so I didn't even know what I really wanted. I just know I wanted to be involved with the space. So I was just like, okay, I guess we'll just start a podcast. And like it's by no means was it like let's take over the world with the podcast. It was like, this is a forum that I can use to start to get clarity around what I actually want to be doing. And so we're about 70 episodes into that podcast. Been doing it weekly for about 1.5 years. And what I'll say is that I am so much clearer about what we're doing and why we're doing it today than I was when I started.
So in a one sentence, why do you do it?
The podcast?
Yeah.
Now, so to begin with, it was to just figure out what I wanted to say. Now it is to provide a place for people to start to learn the skill set of giving. Podcasts are kind of interesting mediums because they allow people to start to change the way they look at things. If you're on a consistent way of, if you're listening to something on a consistent basis, you'll start to have it ingrained in you.
Right.
And so the podcast is just one of the many forms that we're starting to utilize as far as just getting on people's radar and helping them start to work through essentially what is a customer journey. If you've done any work in marketing, you know that there's this period of somebody having to discover that they have a need in the first place, or they have something, or that they're missing something, or whatever that happens. And then they go through this journey to actually get to the point where they're willing to act. And so we have to provide content along that whole journey for someone to go from not knowing or not feeling like they can do something to being able to do something. Like that is essentially what we've started to build, is this journey that someone can go through, both digitally and in person. We'll talk about both of those in a way that can start to spark in somebody, wait a second, maybe there is a chance that I can do that, or I've never thought about doing that before. Maybe I can go and do X, Y, and Z. And that's what we like. That really is where we are at. The purpose of what will be GrassRoots Giving. We're changing basement philanthropy only because philanthropy is a hard word to say.
It is.
A lot of people think that it has more to do with rich people than just foundations, those big kind of rich individuals. And so it's just not as relatable. And so this term of grassroots giving is a little bit more relatable, and this concept of giving as a skill, which will be what the podcast will become.
So you're going to change the title?
I'm going to change the title.
Wow.
Yep, we'll change that sign. It'll probably still always be there as a memorabilia.
GrassRoots Giving.
Yeah, GrassRoots Giving is the organization and will be the handles of all of the social media that we'll be involved with, and will actually be the website. So we'll get that all done before the article posts so that we can direct people there.
Okay, the last paragraph. But now it's changed. Right? But you're going back to the skill set. There's a woman that I wrote about who, she's a realtor.
Cool.
She sells lots of houses.
Yeah.
And that's her gig.
Yeah.
But she'd heard about this housing thing from a friend in the DR. And she said, do I sell a house to build a house?
Yeah.
But she makes apples. Gourmet apples.
Oh, cool.
She sells them for like $15 a pop. She made $17,000 in 1 year just to build a house with gourmet apples. And I thought, okay, now that is a skill, right?
Yeah.
She knew she wanted, it goes back to your conversation. I know I want to give. I don't know how I can.
Yes.
But I thought about it, and I can do apples.
Yeah.
I can make apples. And they're doggone beautiful apples.
Yes. Yeah.
So now she's built another one.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's a beautiful process, and it's one that I feel very grateful to just be a part of.
Right.
Like when you're able to be a part of that with somebody on an individual level, it's one of the most beautiful things that I've been able to experience, is because actually the thing that gets in the way of people's giving is actually not that they don't have money, or they don't have time, or that they don't have talent. It's actually that they don't think that they matter.
That's interesting. It's they feel they don't matter. Okay.
Yeah. It's this concept that I've started to realize, that somebody actually sees these problems and they think, what in the world would my small contribution do? How would I ever be able to make an impact in this area? And the challenge is because we have such a broad sense of what is happening in the world. We see these things like the fire that just happened in Hawaii, terrible disaster, or, the Syrian refugee crisis, or, whatever you want to list. And they're huge problems, and they're things that feel very unreachable to the individual, the everyday person. And so we get into this mentality, and I see this all the time. People either think that they have to change the world, or they're going to sit on the sidelines. There's no in between. There's no middle ground. It's either I am going to start a nonprofit, or I'm not going to do anything. And I think the reason why that is a typical mentality is because we've reframed these challenges to be so global. And there's nothing wrong with being around those challenges, but it creates this big barrier to entry that doesn't allow someone to get involved because they just don't know how. And they're so big. These challenges are so big that they just don't feel like they could ever have any sort of impact on it.
That is incredible, because I think you're right, because you go big or you go home. You've heard that phrase, right?
That's right.
Not really. You can have a little bit of talent that can go a long ways
Yes.
if you decide. It's
Yes.
all about making the decision and choice to say, I'm going to go do something. I'm going to give $10 for a bag of rice.
That's right.
Or. And pretty soon you have 100 people giving 10 bags of rice, and that's a boatload of rice.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And that's really, now that we've gotten the spot, that is where the vision around what we do at GrassRoots Giving comes into play. We want to provide experiences for our local community. We have a community here based where I am in Utah, and for our online community to be able to start to see themselves in a different light, to have the small experiences that allow someone to start to reframe, I do matter, or I don't have a lot of money, but I have $10, and what would that do? And it's similar to, again, it kind of is crazy how similar my experience of this and the financial track is. You take $10 today and then you push that out 40 years. It's way more than $10.
Oh, sure. No question.
And the same thing happens with giving. Someone starts to just do, like, let's just take a small example, like on somebody's walk. This is something I'll often tell people. On your next walk, just take a grocery bag with you and just pick up some trash. Like, just try that as an experience. Or another example, next time you go to the grocery store, double up on your non-perishable items and take one of those bags to a food bank. Like, just these really small experiences that, in their whole, by no means is it going to change the world. But what it starts to do is it starts to push against those thoughts that we have. And those quickly start to develop into things that are much bigger and broader.
It's a starfish. That one matters.
Yes.
One bag of groceries goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. And the cool thing is that it goes a long ways from the standpoint of the food, but it even goes bigger in the individual.
Right.
And so, oftentimes there's this movement called effective altruism that is out there. And essentially what effective altruism is we want to make sure that our dollars are used in a way that most benefits the world. And I think that is a later skill to develop. I think if we look too deep into giving, that we scare people away, and that if we start out with just small reachable things, then we can build the skill set into them being involved in that. It's like saying, like somebody that barely knows first grade arithmetic, let's introduce calculus to that person. Right. They're going to run away from it. Of course you're going to do that. But so I think that from my perspective, it's not always about the impact up front. It's more about just giving someone the experience of, oh, I can actually do this. And then as the skill set grows, they can be more effective and more efficient and start to understand that, like, oh man, if I put, this effort in here, it actually does much bigger impact than me doing this effort here. I think that's an acquired skill. I don't think that that's an initial thing to start out with.
Right. Good. That's except I think a lot of the questions you've already asked, because part of, is now I understand a little bit better when you call yourself a micro-philanthropist. It's microbursts that become hailstorms.
That's right.
They just become huge.
Yeah.
And it sounds like from the podcast, you have learned a lot of things about people, particularly, and how people can grow and develop and learn that they're better than what they think they are. I mean, that's something we have all talked about forever and a day, right?
Yeah.
How do we make people feel better than what they think they are?
Yeah.
But it's always been about giving of yourself, getting outside yourself. Because when we're so us, we have things brought into our vision so close that we forget the big picture.
Yeah.
You take the tiniest little piece of anything, a kernel of corn, if you will, and put it you only see the kernel of corn.
That's right.
And in a lot of things that I've done, I use a pencil and say, okay, put the pencil all the way out in front, focus on that pencil, and what do you see? I only see the pencil.
Yeah.
You didn't see the guy running back of you. No, I didn't see that. No,
Yeah.
I just see the pencil.
Yeah.
But it's the minuteness, but we need to take that out of our line of vision.
Yeah.
And say, we are better than what we are.
Yeah.
And that's what you're teaching people. I think that's awesome.
One of the coolest experiences that I've found that helps somebody do that in a really powerful way is actually volunteering at a food bank. I love food banks. Number one, because they
Yes,
have immediate impact, and oftentimes they're very well-run organizations.
Yes.
And that's not for all of them. Food banks are just like any other organizations. There are some good ones. There's some bad ones out there as far as the way they're run. But I love food banks because it actually has the power to really wake somebody up. And the reason why is if you go to a food bank and you actually participate in the giving of food, there's sorting and there's other things that you can be involved with, which is all important work. But if you actually get a chance to, a lot of these food banks are built in like store-like fronts where somebody will come in and there's a volunteer that kind of walks that person through that experience. If you go through that experience as someone that can go to the grocery store and buy food.
Whatever food you want.
Whatever you want. And then you go through with a family of 3 or 4 and you have to pick out, hey, here's the vegetable section. You get 3 cans. You start to like have this experience of like, wait a second, I can go whenever I want and I can buy those cans. This person can't, and they live in my neighborhood. Like those things kind of come together in a way that's really allows someone to kind of wake up a little bit and say, wait a second, holy smokes, like there's something happening here that I didn't see before. And it's one of the reasons why I love food banks. There's a lot of experiences that can create that in somebody, but it's one of the reasons why I really like food banks is because there's something about seeing an experience that you are involved with on a weekly basis you don't even think about. And then you have to start to kind of question that a little bit.
When we were in the Dominican Republic, we also had one of our responsibilities at Bishop Storehouse.
Yeah.
And, Bishop Storehouse in Utah is like going to Walmart. There were 11 items.
Yeah.
Basic items. You're talking about basic items. You're talking about sugar, rice, beans, flour, soap, oil, and milk.
Yeah.
You think about those things, you think, that's it.
Yeah.
That's all you get. I think they've added cornflakes now. But you're right. It's you walk people through, and they are so thankful to get something that they can use, and especially rice and beans.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing thing.
Yeah.
So you're right.
The cool thing that so as we started, I just started off kind of on my own, and then we'll kind of talk about maybe some of that exponential growth that we've already started to see, which is. It's just, I just feel so privileged and honored to be able to just be a part of that equation. And it's kind of where we come back to the seed piece of the equation. I really do not feel like whatever is created, that it is like mine. I really feel so just like grateful to be along for the ride. And of course, I'm going to show up and I'm going to do my part and I'm going to make sure that things happen. And like I take the responsibility that is supposed to be on my shoulders, and I take that seriously, and I give myself credit, whatever that needs to look like. But it is so fun to start to watch things happen outside of who you are as an individual. So I've got a lot of really fun experiences, but I'll share just a couple. About a year ago, there were a couple girls in our local community that were feeling disconnected socially. They just, kind of sick of like the parties, and they just come off the pandemic. And so there was kind of some highlights of need for being able to be in a community and social and those types of things. And they came to their a local church group, and they said like, hey, instead of just us doing these like social gatherings, what if we like did something that was a little bit more impactful? So I was a part of the same church group, and so I was asked to be involved with creating something that looked like this, just because of the background that I have in this work. And so instead of doing the normal food drive thing, which is typically you like, hey, everybody, we're having this activity. Right. Everybody bring a couple cans, and like you have 300 people show up, and like it's fine, great. Like you get, whatever, how many cans that is, but like it's fine. But we were like, no, let's do something that's way bigger than that. And we started to say, is there a way for that to become exponential? Like I just am very obsessed with this term of exponential growth. How do we take those things? So essentially what we did is we got the volunteers in this church group. There was about 120 people that said, hey, I want to be involved in some way in this thing. And so instead of just saying, okay, you 120 people bring cans, we said, what if we just use these 120 people as man hours? And we started to affect the broader community here. So you went from kind of keeping track, you went from 3 people to adding me, that's 4. Then we got 120 people involved from that organization. What we decided to do is we decided that we were going to involve the broader community by putting bags on people's doors. So we went from 120 people to 4,000 households because we went and put about 4,000 bags on people's homes. And, we had no idea what it was going to do. Like, it was just kind of a hunch that we had. Like, if we did this, it would probably be bigger than if we just had the average person, these 120 people get involved. Well, when we started the day of collecting the food, we just had no idea what it was going to look like. And so we're sitting here at my house and kind of just waiting for the cars to start coming back. And we just didn't know what was going to happen. All of a sudden, a couple, trickle came in. And so we started to form this line because we thought oh yeah, we'll just get this food out and it'll be great. For the next 3 hours, just consistent food came in from the community. So we ended up being able to donate 6,000 pounds of food to Tabitha's Way and around, the Christmas time. And this was at a time where food banks were in dire need.
Yeah, just during COVID.
Yeah. Well,
this
is past COVID, but it was when the kind of recessionary clouds were in the way. Okay. And so what happens, especially in food banks, they get hit in a double whammy when that happens because donations drop as needs rise. And so it was just a really good time for us to be involved with this. And it was just this reality of wait a second, okay, this actually works. If we actually start to leverage our time and our talents and our money as a group and as a community, we can start to make things happen that never could have happened before. And so from that, we started the more community group that's based here in Utah. We have about 400 people in this group. And it just continues to grow.
What's the title of it? Did you put a title on it?
Yeah, so this is GrassRoots Giving.
Oh, this is okay.
Yes. So GrassRoots Giving is a community-based organization and is also a content hub. And so they essentially have the same mission, and that mission is just to help everyday people develop this skill set of giving before they're rich or retired. That's basically what we're involved with. And so we've started to do projects every 3 weeks. That have some sort of view of that first project. So we typically do a big project every 6 weeks, and then every 3 weeks we do a smaller project. So the big projects, think of things like painting school curbs or building beds or food drives, these big types of experiences. And the smaller projects have a lot less people. So we're thinking between 10 and 20 people. And those consist of things of volunteering at a food bank to sort food, or volunteering at an aid organization to help them with their inventory. Or this next Wednesday, we're going to help the organization in downtown Salt Lake called the Intermountain Therapy Animals Group. And we're going to help them certify therapy animals. So there's just a lot of different things that we can be involved with. But we do that every 6 weeks, every 3 weeks, there's some sort of project going on. And the whole reason behind that is actually to just give people those initial experiences around, oh, okay, maybe I can get involved with this. Maybe I can do this. And then we get access to them to start to get from a broad community level down to the individual, which is what we actually care about. I actually care about Susie starting to put $5 aside a month to give. That's where the real impact happens. We talked earlier in our conversation about this healing that happens. I realized as I started to earn money, I realized that what everybody says about earning lots of money and being famous, whenever people get there, they always say, it's not worth it. Or it's not as good as everybody says it is. And yet we all still keep going down that treadmill to get there. It is just this crazy craze that we have as human beings to get there. And I just started to really question that in my life and say, I need enough to live, obviously, and I want to be giving. And so I care about resources from that standpoint. But I just am not, I've simplified my life down into some very specific intentional areas that allow me to do this work. And that's because I've decided that that's what I want to be doing. I don't really care about being involved with this like big social scene. I don't really care about, going on immaculate vacations or those, and the reason why I don't care is not because they're not fun or that I have any judgment towards people that like those things. I've just discovered a life that is so much more fulfilling. And it's funny because I thought that the life that I'm living now, that it would happen when I was either rich or retired.
Right. And
here I am, I'm 28 years old and I feel like I'm retired. I don't have the resources to be retired. Like I still have to work and those types of things, right? But in a lot of ways, I feel like I thought that I would feel like when I would have that experience. And it's just been this beautiful journey. And I felt, a lot of people feel disconnected socially.
Sure.
I feel so connected. I feel so fulfilled. I feel so like I have enough. Like it is just this very, this place of being that is not scarce. It's very abundant. Like I just feel like I have enough and that I have plenty to give. And the more that I give, it feels like the more that happens. And so I've almost become obsessed with that because it just is like, it's the only thing in my life that is actually fulfilled on that.
Now, part of that, now you did a podcast, you had 70 plus different groups. I'm assuming they've been all different individuals or organizations or whatever.
Yeah.
What do you think has been the impact you've had on them?
Yeah.
Maybe of course, I'm the high rate guy. Have you done any, of course, you haven't been as long to do a longitudinal study.
Not yet.
But have you seen some differences that you've made or you've helped them make in their thinking or discovering process?
Yeah. And that is actually my favorite piece of the equation. Okay. It's what I'm actually very obsessed with. Everything else that kind of feels like normal, like, oh yeah, they do these big service projects. It's all just to get to the individual. What I actually care about is getting out with the individual and start to help them understand this side of the equation. So there's a lot of different examples that I'll share. There's a friend of mine, her name's Julia. She works in home health physical therapy. And before we started talking, she loved her job because she was able to, be with these people. And she's just a very happy, kind individual just to begin with. But she never thought of herself as someone that could make a difference in that piece of the equation. And as we started talking, she realized that she had this really incredible opportunity to make a difference for the individual patients that she was involved with. So she started using her time, talents, and money to make her physical therapy sessions much more than what they were to begin with. So she started to remember clients' birthdays, or she started to remember really important things in their life, or, their favorite snack, or, whatever it was that would come up. She started to go out and actively participate in that. And I just actually got, yesterday I went to an ideas night, kind of like a TED Talk, but it's not necessarily the same branding, but she gave a talk last night. And I just got to see almost this full circle effect of what that has done for her to be more proactive in that area, the things that she's learned, the person that she's become. It's just this beautiful, beautiful experience. And I have, multiple experiences that I can tell you about this exact same thing. And what I think that it does for people, and, I'll give you some names that you can go and ask them yourself. But what I think that it does for people is it starts to crack their own understandings of how do you find meaning in your life? How do you find connection? How do you find yourself as mattering? And how do you make a difference in the world? And if we're able to help people see that, that's a really beautiful gift to be involved with giving. And it is one that ripples across individuals and communities and generations. And ultimately, it's actually what gives me hope. Because the thing that you'll notice, or someone will notice as they get involved in this space, is that it is challenging emotionally. Because as soon as you start to understand the privilege that you actually have in the world, you can spin pretty fast. What I mean by that is once you start to realize that 7% of the world lives off less than $2.15 a day, and you are making even minimum wage in the United States, right. It's multiples higher than that amount. You start to ask yourself questions that I've asked that are the questions that are hard to answer, and they're why. What put me in a situation where I don't have to be in that, where I've honestly have this, if there's a red carpet to be rolled out as far as luck and genetics and those types of things, living in the United States, growing up in the family that I grew up in, like I won the lottery 100%. And anybody that is in the United States to begin with has won the lottery in some respects. And you start to see these things and these things in the world that are so hard. And I've noticed, and I've been on a journey with this, that there's a darkness that starts to come into your life. And it's a darkness not because of, giving, but it's a darkness because of the unfairness of a lot of the situations. And that you start to realize that you have not done as much as you like to give yourself credit for to have success in your life. That somebody that was born in a third world country probably has just as much smarts as you have.
Oh, no question.
And for one reason or another, they're not able to do it. And the only thing that has actually given me hope in this, because I've gone down that journey myself, is this concept of if we can get more people involved, maybe we can actually have an impact. Because I can't do it on my own. I just know that I can't. And it's a humbling thing. And it's not to push against this concept that individuals matter, but it just, as we look at these challenges, they are bigger than one individual. They're bigger than a Bill Gates. But they're not bigger than a community coming together and making a difference. And maybe, and we can talk about more experiences, but maybe the last one that I'll share is for one of our big projects recently, we decided that we wanted to give our community a more holistic view of their giving. So instead of just having them show up somewhere, we wanted to give them an experience where they started to see kind of more of the cradle to finish project. And so we started off a couple weeks ago with a experience where we brought a nonprofit. The nonprofit is Sleep in Heavenly Peace. It's a local nonprofit. We brought them in, and we had what we called a night that was called Floats and Philanthropy. Essentially what we did is we had a bunch of Reaper floats. There was about 70 people that showed up to this, environment. And we got to have them connect with each other. Sleep in Heavenly Peace got to speak for about 10 minutes. I got to speak for about 5 minutes and essentially just plant that seed in their minds and say, hey, we want to raise $3,000 to go towards this nonprofit that will use that money to build beds for people in our community who don't have beds. And so we essentially built up what's called peer-to-peer fundraising. And essentially what that means is we took the 70 people and we said, not only can you give, why don't we get your community involved? Why don't if we got your parents to donate $10 or your sister to donate $5 or whatever that might be? And we can probably reach this 3,000 goal fairly easily. We kind of set it low, to be honest. Like $3,000 with 70 people is not actually that big of a raise if you think about it and break it down personally. But it didn't matter. Again, these experiences for us are all about showing people that they matter, not making every single project 100% impactful. It's about the long term. We're about the long game here as far as investing in people. So we had that experience and we started to raise money. And then 3 weeks later, we actually got to go and build the beds.
Wow.
So we showed up at the nonprofit so someone could have this experience of saying, I put in $20, $25, $50, whatever that was. And then they showed up and there's this lumber that's there because of their money. And they got to be involved in the organization. I love what Sleep in Heavenly Peace does because they allow such a hands-on experience. But you go from raw lumber to finished beds in a matter of a couple hours. And so we had a similar group of people, about 70 people, show up that day. And I think we built 10 beds that day. And we ended up delivering 10, but we gave them enough funding that I think that they can build about 20 to 25 beds from that. I don't know the exact numbers, but it was just this really cool experience again that started to show myself and everybody that was involved, those 70 people that put in money and then showed up and then got to deliver. That's an experience that starts to be able to be powerful enough to crack down some of these walls. And the beautiful thing that I've noticed is, although there are forces that are well at play that are all about this concept of you don't matter, social media, advertising, people's friend circles, whatever it is that is pushing against it, there is something about an in-person giving experience that transcends all of that, that cuts through it in a way that I don't know of anything else that does, that helps somebody feel connected, meaningful, purposeful, and confident in themselves in a way that I just haven't experienced in anything else. And there's scientific backing behind some of those concepts. There's studies around people being happier and more fulfilled and kind around these things. So there's real reasons for that to happen. But it really is this just incredible experience to watch somebody go through that and to go on the other side of that and say, wow, I can do something and I can cut through this. And thank goodness that real life personal experiences did that, because I don't know if we would survive as a humanity with the way that we're going with the technology if we couldn't push back in some way around it.
I hope you succeed, because of course the research is out now. We have so many kids on devices that are like this, that they don't get outside. And I've heard one young man say, 10 years old, I don't do outside. I'm going, you're going to atrophy as a human being, right? You're going to atrophy as a human being.
We need you to get outside.
We need to get you outside.
Kind of where we're headed now is continuing to build the community that we have in person, but we are more increasingly going online to the different forms of social media that allow us to have more reach. So think of, short form video content on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, long form YouTube content, social media posting, those types of things allow us to have a much broader impact on the kind of the conversation that is happening. And that really is what we are starting to do. We're starting to lower this barrier to entry and give people real life examples of what they can do. Because the funny thing about the world we live in is that it has never been easier to get involved.
Never.
Yeah, it's never been easier to volunteer. It's never been easier to donate. You can donate to causes that really matter in third world countries in a matter of 2 seconds if you want to.
You can Venmo me in 2 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. And but the ironic thing is that people are almost more afraid of those experiences.
Why do you think that's the case?
I think it is because we have in some ways distanced ourselves from what it takes to get outside of ourselves. So you talked about the 10-year-old that says I don't do outside or this time.
Really?
you talk about that individual, and I think that's what people experience. And so the thought of Googling a nonprofit and then calling them, there's some distance between that, or not even thinking that that's a real, not even thinking about that. That's the funniest thing. People, one of the biggest questions I get is like, Grant, how do you volunteer? And I'm like, well, literally anything that you want to do, type it into Google and say nonprofit after it.
Right.
There's probably one in your area.
I can give you 20.
Yeah, call
right now.
Call them and then do that. And the dog group that we're associated with, I literally did that. I'm very interested. I love dogs. Right. I'm very interested in being involved with a therapy animal at some point in my life. And so I went on Google and I said, hey, what are therapy organizations near me? I got in contact with this Intermountain Therapy group. I started to get involved with them on more of a quarterly basis. I helped them do these certification trainings that they do. And now that's opened up into me being able to bridge my community into this. So next Tuesday, there'll be about 12 of us that'll go down to this organization and be able to participate in this. And the incredible thing that happened is I always wanted to be involved with this. Now I'm tapped in this community that knows everything about what it takes, how you can do that, what type of dog breeds are the best, what trainers should you use, all these things that I would never be able to do on my own. All of a sudden, when I reach that point in my life, there's this huge network. And anybody can have that experience. It doesn't matter if it's dogs or art or football or whatever it is that you want. There's likely some sort of bridge that you can create. But that's the content that we're starting to develop. People just don't see that as being possible. But when you introduce it to somebody, it seems so obvious and it seems so reachable. Effective, sustainable, consistent giving is always better than flash in the pan. And that's why individual giving is actually the best place to be, because big projects, big service projects, although they're fun, they're not actually that impactful.
No, they're just one-time run.
Yeah.
That's all you do at one time. You got to get, it's like building capacity.
Yes.
And the foundation say, yeah, I just got $10 today. That's great. But what you want is $1,000 in the bank to give you $10,000 or $10 every week.
Yes.
So and I've worked with a lot of groups like this. Now it's about building capacity.
Yeah, that's right.
So it goes back to your father's put $1 in, and if the interest is good, you're going to get money back, right?
He's a pretty smart guy.
Sounds like he's a bright guy, but that's hard for people because there are just a lot of people who don't have savings.
Yeah, it's very true. But the cool thing about it is once people, like, you have to have some sort of financial plan in place if you're going to get involved in this. And so that's, we talk about this healing piece of time, talents, viewing ourselves and money. That's where that starts to come into play is if you want to start giving, you've got to say like, okay, how would I break this down? Then all of a sudden you have a little bit of a personal finance plan in place. Or, I have to use my time a little bit more effectively. Oh, maybe I'm not spending as much time just doom scrolling on whatever social media platform. Like it's just giving is this weird, beautiful thing that starts to ingrain itself into all of these facets and starts to heal. I love that term. I've never used that before. I've really appreciated this interview because I love the term and the process of that healing that can actually happen in people's lives. And it happens because they get outside of themselves.
So Grant, what questions didn't I ask?
Ooh.
Well, what do you want the people to know? And well, of course, the Herald goes all over the place, but Utah County.
Yeah. What would I want people to know?
Well, the best economy in the United States of America is right here.
Yeah, it's so true.
It's a lot of money generated. I mean, you live right there.
Yeah. What I would want people to know and recognize is simply that giving is a skill. And the reason why I would want people to recognize that is because once you start to frame giving as being a skill, you'll start to realize that you're not that good at it. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to have that realization. We have that realization all over the place. You know, when you first start playing soccer, you started to realize you're not that good at soccer. Or when you started in your accounting profession, you realize that you're not that great at accounting. But that realization allows you to open your brain or your mind to the fact that if I'm not that good, I can get better. And once we start doing that, then giving starts to actually make a difference. Because if I can have somebody start to realize that they aren't as good as they think they are at giving, that actually is the best gift that person could ever give. Because they can start to actually put in the work to make a difference. And you're right, we have one of the greatest economies in the world. And from an efficiency standpoint or an effective standpoint, I don't know, this is more anecdotal, but I would say that we're probably not very effective with our giving.
There are a lot of givers, but not long term. You know, I'll give you $25K. Okay.
Yeah.
But I want $25K every year.
Right. So that's once somebody realizes that and then takes responsibility for their giving, which what I mean by that is that you are not, you know, as a person, and this is sometimes hard for people to hear, so I don't always start out with this, but like just because you're doing good does not mean you're doing good. Just because you're showing up and doing something that you think is good doesn't mean that it actually is. And since you're the one that is doing it, you're accountable or responsible for that. We often think that we get a free pass because we're doing something that's generous. It's just not true. And if we can start to take accountability for that, that's when things start to become really, really cool. And am I going to reach everyone? No, a lot of people like to just sit on the sidelines. And that's the reality. But even if I can just reach 1% or 2%, that's a huge amount of people and a huge amount of impact that can happen. And it's the piece that gives me hope. And people that latch onto the idea, there's a movement that's starting to happen, and it's a beautiful thing to be a part of.